Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. We have a jam-packed show yet again. We're going to talk about the bail reform announcement, take a look at the details so we know what it really means. We'll chat about that. We'll talk about Wab Kinew, who hired a former colleague of his from CBC and is making over $380,000 a year. We'll have a long discussion about that. But first, we have a special guest on the show today, and we're very happy to have him come along. It's a member of Parliament, James Bezan, who is also the federal federal critic for the opposition. James, thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, I'm glad to be on the show.
It's nice of you to make the time. And I know defense is a big topic right now, where a lot of people are talking about it, the F-35s. But I think the biggest thing, the first question that I would have is recently Prime Minister Carney announcing that we'll do 5% of GDP on defense spending. Now, when you see that in the budget coming up, will that are they actually going to spend more money on defense, or are they just going to play a shell game?
Well, what they've been doing is creative accounting. So even if we want to compare apples to apples, when we were in government under Stephen Harper, we just counted the defense budget towards defense spending. And so right up until 2015, there was talk that, we were only spending about 1% on national defense. During the time in Afghanistan, we're spending more like 1.4, 1.5% of GDP on defense because we were in a hot war and needed to buy the equipment that the troops needed to do the job. But in reality, the Liberals are saying, well, they're right now spending about 1.35 to 1.4, and they're going to go up to 2% by the end of this fiscal year, which we don't have a budget, we don't have a plan, we don't know how they're going to get to 2% in this fiscal year, which we're already over 6 months in. And they're doing a bunch of creative accounting. So even that 1.4, if we give them the benefit of the doubt that they're at 1.4 today, that includes things like veterans' pensions, which were never in there before. It includes some Global Affairs Canada spending that they do on conflict resolution. It includes some monies from CBSA for border security, as well as RCMP and CSIS, which was never counted in the past. And it includes, up until this point in time, about 11% of the Coast Guard budget. Coast Guard, of course, does some great work out there, but they're not a defense agency. And so now the Liberals are going to take the entire Coast Guard budget and are moving it under defense without gaining any other capability or kinetic equipment for the Canadian Armed Forces, for our troops, for our sailors, for our air crew. They're getting absolutely nothing out of this other than a bump in spending, which doesn't necessarily create any more capability for the Canadian Armed Forces.
So what you're saying, I mean, you're very nice about it, calling it creative accounting. I call it a shell game. But what you are saying, and I want to make sure we have this right, is that the spending that they're talking about, or how they've moved the dollars around, are not necessarily going to put more boots on the ground. They're not going to put more ships in the water. They're not really going to intensify or build up our national defense.
No, and so there's a few things that we're expecting in the budget, which comes down November 4th, is, they said that they're going to give a 20% raise to the troops. Well, they announced that back 6 months ago, and the troops still haven't seen the money. So, that's an easy way to spend some defense dollars, but it still doesn't get us anywhere near 2%. What I expect to see is that the only way that they can actually get to 2% by the end of this year, never mind work towards 5% over the next 10 years, is they're going to have to put out a pile of dollars on things like Golden Dome, which, Carney has talked about. Trump says we're going to buy in. And even with that, a lot of Golden Dome is still in the developmental stage. It's very nascent. The space nodes that they want to add into the protection of North America hasn't even been developed yet. And so there's going to be a bunch of money that goes out from Canada potentially to get to 2% and above without actually, again, doing anything that protects Canada today.
Yeah, you've touched on so many issues that cause such concern for Canada. I don't call it creative accounting. I call it caustic accounting because it's so corrosive to Canadian defense and interests, right? So it's really a terrible thing. And you raised some other issues that I just want to touch on. They involve what's happening in Ukraine. Canada, in my view, and I imagine it's one you share, but I don't know, faces threats from every single direction. They're differential threats. We see Ukraine on the front line. We have troops and whatever tanks we have are in the Baltics. We're facing hypersonic missile technology from Russia, China, even Iran to some degree. And meanwhile, Carney in this performative thing talks about, boycotting Israel that has the most battle tested technology and radars and what have you. And I just don't understand it because shouldn't we be protecting Canadian values and interests and being prepared for the upgrades of NORAD and in the Baltics, the things we really need? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, NORAD modernization is actually something that we're studying at the National Defense Committee right now. And as vice chair of that committee, I've been pushing pretty hard to make sure that we are seeing dollars actually invested in new capabilities. Joining ballistic missile defense has to be first and foremost part of NORAD, something that we've supported for a long time. Wasn't politically able to back in the day because of Paul Martin's original decision and John Chrétien that they weren't going to have any part of it. But times have changed because of as you mentioned, Lawrence, when you look at everything from hypersonic missiles to close-in range cruise missile launches that could happen from a submarine popping up off our shores and firing in. When you look at, the advancement in drone warfare, air defense is something that Canada is sorely lacking in, and that's where the major investments need to happen. Golden Dome down the road, yes, we need to be part of that and do the responsible thing as an ally for continental security and defense. But let's get what's working today and get it on Canadian territory. I was up looking at the North Warning System in Iqaluit and actually at Tuktoyaktuk over the past year. North Warning System, which is our radar that's on the continent and doesn't actually cover the Arctic archipelagos at all, but they're aging out. Their end of lifespan is this year.
Right.
So we're talking about technology that's already over 30 years old that is starting to rust out and play out and what's worn out. But at the end of the day, what's the replacement? They're talking about over the horizon radar systems that are going to be actually mainly in the south and one up north. But it doesn't replace what the North Warning System does, especially when it comes down to tracking incoming threats. It can detect with the over horizon, but can't track. And so we need to make sure that we still have a plethora of different technologies, including the upgrades or replacements of the North Warning System, as well as the over-the-horizon radar system, to make sure that we are using every sensor possible to monitor any threats that are coming into our airspace, our maritime space, and having the right way to defend Canada and the continent.
So, James, if I can jump in for a second, I mean, it sounds like you're saying our technology up north is at end of life, and I agree with you on that. When I imagine it, I imagine somebody standing in a tower with binoculars is what we probably have right now. But we also hear a lot from people in politics, but not necessarily the average Canadian or mainstream media talking about how important it is to have to strengthen our defense in northern Canada, in the north. And I don't see any spending, and I haven't heard of any plans to invest not just in the technology, but even to invest in having more troops present. I mean, if we're going to have a northern port, whether it be Churchill or somewhere else, would we not want to protect those waters more? I have a friend of mine that works in the Canadian Armed Forces, and he mentioned to me that there's Chinese and Russian boats up there many, many times, and they're not prepared. They're not qualified or ready to deal with that.
When I was in Tuktoyaktuk, there was 6 Chinese, research vessels sailing around only 200 nautical miles off the shores of Canada and the United States up on the edge of the Beaufort Sea. We have to make sure that we can respond to that. We know that those research vessels that the People's Liberation Army Navy use up there as part of they call them Coast Guard science vessels, but they are dropping surveillance buoys. They are trying to get a handle on the resources that are available. In the last election, we promised under Pierre Poilievre that we would switch the forward operating locations that we have at Iqaluit and at Inuvik into full-time wings, where we would have, future F-35 stationed up there. The wings those locations have to be upgraded to handle F-35s anyway. If the Liberals actually put plain politics on that procurement and buy the F-35, which is what our Air Force, our Department of National Defense have been asking for, and they did again last week. They want the F-35. It's the best possible plane to defend Canada and protect our aviators. If we're going to be dealing with fifth generation stealth fighter aircraft from other countries, then we better have a fifth generation stealth fighter ourselves. And if you're going to put the money into upgrading those forward operating locations, then let's make them full-time wings that we can always have presence up there, a permanent presence, not persistence presence, and that we can also have the new P-8 Poseidon maritime surveillance aircraft up there. Canada's looking at buying AWACS. They should be up there. The more that we can have presence and quickly intercept, especially in the Western Arctic, almost all the aerial incursions and the maritime exploration that is being done by Russia, China, and others, we need to have presence up there. And that means that we also need a Navy base, more of a naval presence. And so making use of Churchill makes sense, as well as probably Tuttiutuk, Grays Bay is another place that there's been discussion. But these decisions have to be made, and those investments have to happen now, not 10 years from now. War is not waiting for Canada to get her act together. And unfortunately, what we're witnessing is a lot of talk, but no walk out of these Liberals.
On procurement, because you touched on it for the F-35s, and we see a problem really with the Liberals and maybe many governments over the years. Now, Mr. Carney has announced a procurement office, another level of bureaucracy. We saw you at committee asking every person there, do you agree with the F-35 or not? Everybody agreed.
What's your question, Lawrence?
Instead, we see Mr. Carney saying, here's a bureaucracy, here's my friends at Goldman Sachs at $500,000 each or more. So the question is, what's wrong with procurement and how do we fix it?
So procurement is inherently risk adverse the way it's been done for far too long. We have to get around that by, streamlining through using national security exemptions, because we need this equipment today. It doesn't necessarily, negate the responsibility of government to follow Treasury Board guidelines to ensure that procurement is responsible. But what the Liberals have done is created a new bureaucracy within a bureaucracy with their Defense Investment Agency. They went and hired Mark Carney's buddy, Doug Guzman, who worked with him in Goldman Sachs, RBC background as well. And he's getting $679,000. He's now the highest paid political appointee in this Liberal government. And with the bonuses, has the potential to make up to $1 million a year. So, and then you look at this guy's resume, it doesn't say defense or procurement anywhere in it. So we're getting an investment banker to take over an agency who, again, is going to potentially undermine current procurements that are underway, and you're going to have to, have this agency within procurement in Canada, and I just don't see how that is actually going to benefit us in any way, shape, or form in cutting red tape, reducing the political interference that we see from these Liberals all the time. F-35 is a key point that they played politics on this procurement for the last 50. And we need to just go out there and get the equipment that we need today so that Canadian Armed Forces can train, that we can get their numbers back up again, because they've left because they don't feel like they're at all respected or honored by this current government. And the Liberals have been, doing their woke ideological experiments, and soldiers and air crew and sailors are voting with their feet and leaving en masse. And the recruitment side of it hasn't, it's getting better, but it still hasn't been fixed. And we're still short of the critical equipment and infrastructure we need to support modern warfare. And we always got to remember that we are training war fighters. And meanwhile, it seems like for the last 10 years, the Liberals have been trying to turn them into a paramilitary organization.
Hmm. Interesting. James, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your many years of service for Canadians and Manitobans especially. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate your insight on the defense spending and such. I think it's a topic we've got to learn more about, and a topic we have to talk more about. So thank you very
Yeah,
much for making the
it's
time.
going to be the biggest spend in the budget, aside from what we spend on national debt servicing,
Yeah,
which is now takes way more money out of the taxpayers' pocket
yeah.
than even defense spending or healthcare. So it's one that we should be watching carefully. We want to make sure that taxpayers' dollars are respected, and that at the end of the day that we're getting the military equipment that we need to protect Canada and be a reliable ally for both NORAD and NATO.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, James. Interesting information that James provided. You can leave us. All he has left us. Interesting information that James has provided us, especially about the Mark Carney appointment making almost
Okay.
$700,000 a year.
But here's everything that our friend James just said, he could have said while his party was in power. The ineptitude, the lack of commitment to our military. Stephen Harper would fly up to the Arctic once a year and put on a show, but backed it up with nothing.
Hmm.
They could have bought the F-35s when they were in power. They didn't do it. They didn't increase military spending. They disregarded our veterans. Everything that James just said, he could have said while his party was in power. Every single criticism he levied at the current government, save this one political appointee, could have been said while the Harper government was in power.
Isn't that the case though with all parties, Jeff? I mean,
Well,
I
mean,
see
it's
it with anybody who gets elected,
right.
right?
But procurement was worse under the Conservatives than it is today.
I disagree with you completely, Jeff. That's not the case from my understanding and my look at things. It's always been a problem. I alluded to that in my question. It's always been a problem, always been politicized. You can look back at the great Brian Mulroney and the CFA teens. If you recall, the lowest bid was Manitoba and Bristol, and they went to Quebec for a political reason, as you may recall. But having said that, we have to govern, we have to think about politics in the windshield, not the rear view mirror. All his points he raises are spot on, at least in my view.
Right, but they were spot on. They were spot on 20 years ago.
And the reality of the conflicts we face today in the world, from China, from Russia, former Soviet Union, and from Iran, and even the challenges from south of the border, which are different. They're not a sort of a military threat, but they are a threat, put us in a completely different situation than what we were in back then.
No, disagree, and I'll tell you why. 20 years ago, the Conservative government knew that China had purchased the second largest icebreaker on the planet. Now, what does China need an icebreaker for? They knew this was coming. Everybody in the world, Stevie Wonder could see this coming. They knew, James Bezan and his party knew all of this was going to happen, and they did nothing to stop it.
Well, I just, because most of our history, as you know, our modern Canadian history has been governed by the Liberal Party of Canada. And yes, I agree, it's been a problem that every government, including Mulroney's, that I liked, use this as a political tool. And military procurement should not ever be used as a military tool. So while I agree with you in part, I disagree with you in part as well. But that's the nature of good conversation.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in a little bit here. I understand what both of you are saying, but the reality is that in politics it does change, right? So now that the defense is a bigger topic, a more discussed topic, governments are going to talk about it, and the oppositions are going to talk about it. Just like the Conservatives in Manitoba are talking about how bad the healthcare is, but when the NDP were in there, they were talking how bad the healthcare was, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's the problem with politicians. And I like the statement that Lawrence made. We've got to look through the windshield and not the rear view mirror. But
Okay, but here, you guys all know the politics of this.
yes,
That in between elections, this is like talking about the environment. In between elections, the military is a popular topic, but it doesn't get you votes. And the only currency that these guys understand is votes. And that's why neither conservative nor liberal governments have really stepped up to back our military, because it costs a lot of money. These, the F-35, which I think everybody agrees, at least it's got some critics, but I think most of the experts agree the F-35 is the plane we should be getting.
mm-hmm.
They're expensive. They cost a lot of money. And while we need them, if we buy them, how many votes do you get?
Jeff,
and the answer is not very many.
Well, Jeff, but the reality is slightly different. For example, not only did Mr. Churro cancel the F-35s as a political issue, but beyond that, if Russia decides that they're going to do a little incursion into the Arctic, a minor version of what's going on in Ukraine, they claim whatever reason they could come up with, they claim something and they incur. We can't do anything about it, and it's not reasonable to think that the Americans will jump to our defense because they see the Arctic as international waters, not Canadian waters.
Trump has already said he would not.
None of this is news.
But allow me to finish. So my point is, we agree, I think, that Canada has to do more on military spending, has to do much better on procurement. And that's where we should be focused on. We do all agree on that, I think. We agree procurement shouldn't be political. And we agree that historically there have been problems from all parties. But we're in the situation we're in now, and it's perilous based on what China is doing and what Russia is doing, and even what Iran is trying to redo. And so that's, I think, where we have to be focused.
I feel bad we've left Royce out of this entire discussion. Royce, do you have any thoughts on this? It's a good back and forth. It was a good little game of tennis.
Yeah, I don't want to jump in. I mean, military issues are necessarily a kind of second order consideration for Canadian voters. Like if you have a bad encounter with the healthcare system, then that is right up familiar to your face. You're concerned with that. There's a lot of the things that Lawrence is talking about, Russian ships in the Arctic. Well, you kind of have to convince people that's important. You have to convince them that spending is important. And so when push comes to shove for Canadian politicians, military issues tend not to be the priority. It was Harper was governing through that difficult economic period. Trudeau wasn't. And so there's some explanation for differences in that spending. But it's always an uphill battle convincing Canadians that we need this spending.
And let's talk about what Canadians do remember. And I think one of the things they are going to remember, because it certainly caught my attention, is when James talked about the person that Carney hired to do procurement. What's a tough word to say on a Friday? But he talked about his wage being about $700,000. This is getting out of hand because we've just learned in Manitoba that Premier Wab Kinew hired one of his friends, a former reporter at CBC when he was there, I'm guessing, to be an advocate, if you will, for Manitoba in Washington, D.C. He has absolutely no business experience or negotiating experience at a corporate or international level. He was a reporter. And he's making over $380,000 a year. That's more than the premier. That's more than the mayor of Winnipeg. That's almost as much as the Prime Minister of Canada. I want to start talking about how these patronage appointments are costing Canadians, Manitobans, Winnipeggers, everyone. They're costing us hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of dollars now, and they're not resulting in anything.
Well, the guy just got the job. So
been there 5 months.
Okay, but that's yes. I mean, 5 months is a pretty short time to get a trade deal done. And having said that, I know that there's going to be some outrage about the salaries that these people are making, and they're probably a little out of whack. But here's what people can relate to: if we spend $30 billion a year, and it's going to be more than that, just to service the national debt, people can't process that. What really annoys people is if the meatloaf in the parliamentary cafeteria is only $6 when they're paying $12.50 at their local restaurant. It's so. I mean, I think we need to. Can we focus on something a little bit bigger
Well,
then
Jeff, this is
whether or not this guy's making 100,000 more
but
than he
this is a
should.
big deal. This is a big deal to me because this is what's wrong with politics. We're just appointing people that we know. Politicians do it. They did it when I was in politics. I saw that happen right under my feet. They're not hiring people that can do the job. And that's why we're in the position we're in. I mean, we are a have-not province in Manitoba. We're appointing people to these high-paying jobs. Okay, you can say, well, he's only been there 5 months. But what has he done? There's no key performance indicators provided to us. There's no meeting schedules provided to us. We have no idea what this person is doing. We have no idea what his resume is other than what we see online. You would think if you're going to pay somebody that kind of money, that you would hire somebody that is an expert in that field or at least has some education in that field or a little bit of experience in that field. He is not going to be able to get meetings with the corporate giants in the United States. Now, what do they do in Alberta and Saskatchewan? Well, Premier Daniel Smith and Mo Scott head down and have the meetings themselves. Premier Scott actually traveled to China trying to fix things. We're not seeing that here.
Has
We're
it worked?
handing money out to friends. We don't know
Has it
yet.
worked?
We
Has it
don't know
worked?
yet. We have no idea.
Folks, does anyone think that the Republicans who control both houses and the White House don't know what the CBC is, don't know what a CBC reporter is and what they stand for? How on earth does any reasonable person think that a guy from the CBC and everything, all the bias that they've perpetrated for year after year after year, is going to open any doors in Washington? Also, how is it conceivable that Saskatchewan and Alberta and Manitoba have separate people, each earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? It's ridiculous. And I aired about the Goldman Sachs connection. I thought it was $500,000, $700,000 for a guy who has no experience in procurement, it's inconceivable what the incompetence that's going on. And Canadians will pay the price. I don't know if Canadians will relate to how outrageous this is, but it's completely outrageous. And the problems, Jeff, to fix the situation with trade in the United States are structural. In Ottawa with Mr. Carney, they are be fixed by a trade representative for little Manitoba that sits with critical minerals in the ground, refusing to take them out of the ground. That's not going to work. So,
the trips down to the south by the premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan haven't accomplished anything either. I agree. Lawrence said, for me, the issue is not so much how we're paying people, is are we hiring the right people for those salaries? I don't care if we pay a guy $400,000 if he delivers the goods. I don't care if the guy makes $750 a year procuring tens of billions of dollars worth of military equipment if he gets the job done. But are we hiring the right people? And I think that's the question.
But I think people do pay attention to this. Lawrence asked, is it going to catch people's attention? I think it does. I always say this country was basically founded by a bunch of Scots who were enormous cheapskates. It's in our DNA. And a good example of that, you remember Bev Oda's $15 orange juice. She got a glass of orange juice for $15. Just destroyed her political career. There was no coming back from that.
Like I say, it's the $6 meatloaf in the parliamentary cafeteria. That's what people can relate to.
Yeah. And I think people do relate to this kind of stuff. Yesterday in question period, this was coming up, and the premier, Wab Kinew, said that, he hired Madden because he's got the brains and he's got the looks and he's a good storyteller. It was a little bit tone deaf. And I think that my thinking there was that Kinew is not taking it seriously, doesn't think that people are going to engage. Canadians engage with these kinds of things. Overpaid bureaucrats, wow, do they ever engage with that sort of stuff?
And I think if you look at this, and you can say that if you don't mind paying a guy 400 grand if he's getting the results, Jeff, but in the corporate world, CEOs are a lot of their salary, the majority of their salary is based on performance, right? You get paid based on what you can make happen. You can get paid, you can make more money, the company makes more money, you make more money, or you get more shares and all of that. None of that happens within government. We just hand over the check. And I agree with Royce. I get the fact that $6 meatloaf at the parliament is part of it, but I think that's what this is. Because we're seeing people struggling. We're seeing people, like you said, they don't understand that we're paying more in interest payments on our debt than we are to the healthcare system. But this doesn't help. And this is what politics has become, is these patronage appointments. Carney, we've seen Carney do it. We've seen conservatives do it. We see NDP do it. We've seen liberals do it. They all do it. But when does it stop? When does Canada say enough? Because we're on the brink financially. We're now basically going to be, told that we're in a recession here in the next couple of weeks. And it's only going to get worse when they start printing more money. The more money you print as a country, the bigger the inflation problem is going to become. And that's going to be a recession for us.
If a company wants to pay their CEO, shareholders want to pay them millions of dollars, that's not really any of my business. But in the government, I'm a taxpayer. I don't know why anyone needs to get paid $700,000 a year. What are they doing? They're managing people, they're filling out forms, the same things everyone else does in government. It's just not justifiable, I don't think, and people pay attention to these sorts of things. Especially in tough economic times, it's tougher and tougher to justify this stuff.
Well, the thing that for me, one of the things that's a problem in terms of the federal appointments, you're paying 700,000 with bonuses potentially $1 million a year. Okay, so the argument is he has to be competitive with the private sector, but this guy has zero experience with procurement, zero experience with any military matter. So we're paying him to get educated, to get up to a level. What exactly is he going to do? There wasn't any open competition for people with actual experience. This is Goldman Sachs hiring Goldman Sachs. And I can't help but wonder, where is Goldman Sachs invested? Does this guy still have interest in Goldman Sachs, a pension, whatever it is? Do they have investments in any aspects of the military industrial complex? Who's checking on this? It's so ripe with potential graft and problems that it's really appalling in my view. I'd like, and a part of what Jeff is saying, that, my God, sure, pay him $500,000 a year. If he's going to save us $1 billion, it's a great investment. I like that idea, but that's not what's going on here. And we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that that's the case. The one thing Wob has bought, as if he needed it, is more biased, positive coverage from CBC. That's what he's bought here.
And I think that was his intent. I'm sure that was his intent, and it was his intent to, like, he's really trying to be this national Canadian politician more so than be the premier of Manitoba. But let's look at the fact, and let's talk about the facts. We have a lot of trade negotiations going on. We're sending government officials, we're sending bureaucrats. We've hired, provinces have hired their own people, just like Manitoba did. To Jeff's point, Premier Smith has gone down, Premier Scott has gone down, but nothing has happened in trade. I don't know how many days we're on now. There has been no trade deals announced. There's been no resolution to any of the trade issues that we're having, nothing whatsoever. But what we are seeing, and what is proven, is money and investment is leaving Canada at a record pace. We just had the parent company of Chrysler announce they're going to move their Brampton facilities for Jeep down to the United States and invest $30 billion. And the minister responsible, Minister Jolie, said, well, we might have to take them to court and sue them for defaulting on the grants that were given, the subsidies. That's certainly not going to help us attract more businesses. That's not going to help. That's certainly not going to make Chrysler go, ooh, oh no. They're going to spend $30 billion in the US. I think we have bigger problems. And to this point, why I'm bringing this up is that I don't know who we have qualified help in Canada anywhere right now. Can anyone point to anybody who's going to fix this trade crisis? Or give me any example of success that anyone in politics at any party level has had so far?
Well,
that's
we're spinning our wheels right now, right?
Right.
Yeah. The Stellantis thing is a genuine disaster, and it's an indictment of this approach where you just kind of shovel millions of dollars to corporations so they give us a few jobs here in this country, and then they just leave. You're going to sue them. Well, that's just going to make the situation worse. The only thing you can do is try to create a better investment environment. The value of the dollar is low. Like, there are real reasons to build factories here. But when governments are not building the infrastructure necessary, when they're not serious about pipelines, when they're not serious about creating that environment, don't be surprised when corporations take the money and run, which is exactly what happened here, to the great misfortune of these workers in Ontario that are going to suffer as a result. And of course, there's no lessons learned on the part of our politicians. They want to keep the tariffs on Chinese EVs, even if it hurts Western Canadian canola producers. Well, this you can't protect these industries unless you invest in the overall environment. Politicians are just not doing it.
Well, that's exactly the point. I agree with everything you've said. I'm not sure I'm convinced about allowing Chinese EVs into the country, but that's a different question. What the role of the federal government has to be is to create the economic structure, the certainty for business to encourage investment. To say, as Senator Kennedy said down in the Congress, is we should be taking the position to have no trade war, to have zero tariffs with the United States, to allow the free flow and allow competition, to get rid of supply side management. That's what we need to be doing to create certainty, to build those pipelines, to do those things that say to business, invest here. We're the best community to invest in the highest degree of freedom. And the reality is our federal governments and many provincial governments are doing exactly the opposite. If Mr. Canoe wanted to do something that would attract U.S. investment into Canada, we'd get silica out of the ground. We'd get critical minerals that the United States needs. That's what we'd be advertising. That's what we'd be holding out. That's what we'd be allowing out of the ground. Not the nonsense that we see out of both Ottawa and on Broadway and elsewhere. And Mr. Eby in Vancouver, in Victoria is doing exactly the same thing, stilting growth, acting against Canadian interests. And now we see in Brampton workers and their families and all the linkages up and down in that economy will suffer. And the worst thing that Mr. Carney did after that, this is unbelievable. There's a special dinner, a cost of about just under $2,000 a plate in Brampton for a special meeting with Mr. Carney. It's so ridiculous and so rude and blind to what's going on in the economy in Brampton. It's spiteful. It's appalling, and that's what we're dealing with.
Right, but it goes back, like what you're talking about is low-hanging fruit. And if you look at all the governments that we've had, no one has made Canada attractive. They haven't changed the laws, they haven't changed the tax laws, they haven't changed anything. But no one has made it attractive for investment in this country.
You
We've
mean in the
lost.
modern period?
Yeah,
Like currently?
it's not happening.
Currently.
It hasn't happened. And that's low-hanging fruit for politicians. So why wouldn't they? That's my question to you, is why wouldn't they look at doing that immediately? Because I mean, Trump's being a protectionist, right? He's taking care of the United States. So if you're a Chrysler, are you going to sell more vehicles in the United States or are you going to sell more in Canada? Well, you're going to sell more in the US. It's just a business decision. But we haven't created that atmosphere where we can make it easy. Like you said, the dollar's low. Let's take advantage of that. Let's get it. And it doesn't necessarily take giving them money or granting them money. It's getting rid of the hurdles and the red tape that we have at all levels of government. The bureaucracy, I think, is the anchor that's pulling Canada down.
How much of this move do you think by Chrysler across the 49th is an effort to avoid any tariff issues?
100%.
If you manufacture your vehicles in Canada, you're going to be faced with tariffs. If you manufacture them in the States, the tariff issue is gone.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, well, so what does the Canadian government do about that? Because those tariffs were imposed by the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. How do we combat that?
I think I answered that question. You do it by saying it's zero tariffs. You do it by listening to Senator Kennedy and what he said. You do it by being a better, bigger free trader.
Well, doesn't he have to? He has to convince his boss of that, though, doesn't he?
Well, but it's not his boss. But yeah, he does.
Well, it is. He is.
That's how we do it. And it seems to me also, you should know, as I'm sure you do, that municipalities and governors in the U.S. offer tons of money to American industries to locate there. Not only the tariffs, but there's actually positive incentives as well. That's the nature of an international market, and we have to be competitive, but our structures in Canada are anti-competitive. That's what we have to fix. More freedom, not less red tape. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, Kevin asked why politicians aren't doing this. It's because you burn through a lot of political capital. If you want to build a pipeline, Mark Carney could tomorrow say, "Yep, we're getting a pipeline. We're using federal powers to ram this through British Columbia. Let's do it." But there's going to be a lot of cost to doing that, and we see, especially with NDP politicians in the provinces, they're willing to talk a big game about these national projects, but when the rubber hits the road, when there's actually a pipeline, when there's actually natural resource development, all of a sudden they're kind of skittish. They start getting phone calls from the party activists and like, oh, maybe this isn't what we want to do. It's a lot easier for governments to just shovel money at these multinational corporations and hope that they can beat the state of Alabama. Here's a newsflash. I don't think we can. I don't think we can keep corporations here with this sort of stuff. We're learning that now. These multinational corporations are not our friends. Melanie Joly looked like her feelings were hurt as a result of Stellaris Stellaris is a video.
Stellantis.
Stellaris is a
Stellantis.
video game. Stellantis leaving. They're not our friends, and they're not going to invest here. They're not going to create jobs here unless it's right for them.
And I think Jeff hit it on the head, nail on the head, right? It's the tariffs. So they left to make sure they got away from the
Yeah,
tariffs.
it was
I don't
totally
think, I think it's a
predictable.
pipe dream to think that Trump's going to have zero tariffs between Canada and the United States. He said there's going to be some form of tariff. So maybe he does what they did in Britain. I think there's, 10% or 15% on both sides, and it's even across the board. But people don't realize that, I think anyways, when I talk to some of my friends that are, that spend a lot of time investing and such, they're saying, look, if we had a 15% tariff across the board for both countries, Canada wins because of the Canadian dollar being so low.
We
So there's value in that.
we also win because excluding oil and natural gas, we actually we would actually get more money from tariffs. So, but I'm not a tariff guy. The economy requires no tariffs. Look at the revolution that Brian Mulroney brought to Canada. In everything he did, we need a prime minister. We need a government with courage and vision, and we just don't have that.
Right, but you're going to have tariffs. Trump has already said
Well,
there will be a form of tariffs, and I don't think you can sit there and say that someone's going to go down and turn as much as Trump and Carney seem to have this little thing going on now. How Trump wants Carney to represent him at any time and so on. There's no
Kevin,
there's
I
nothing.
think you can bank on this. When Trump says something, he generally means the opposite. You can't actually. He's a guy that gaslights, that does exactly the opposite of what he says. He'll say anything in order to get a negotiating advantage. So I don't think you should assume it's never going to be zero. I don't think I can assume it will be zero. It might be something, but it could be like the EU. It could be even lower. Mr. Trump said that with Canada, it's more difficult because we have competing industries, and we have to get them to see that we're actually not. It should be one, like the European Union, a block market. That's how we win this.
Yeah, but
I
this,
think the number one way, though, that we're not talking about, and it kind of bothers me that not everybody talks about it. We have to end the supply management thing. Like, just end it. And we have politicians that are deathly afraid to end supply management in Canada. So
Well,
we have to,
if I could speak to that for a
yeah,
second, even in the Conservative Party of Canada, Max Bernier campaigned very heavily in his leadership run to end supply management, and it cost him the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. You can't even sell it to conservatives,
I
much
know,
less anybody else.
but
Even
that's
though
the
it might be
problem.
even though it's probably the right thing to do,
Yeah,
you can't sell it.
Well,
but
it's not
why?
that you can't sell it to conservatives. You can't sell it to anyone in Quebec. That's the problem. It's a Quebec and Ontario farming problem. And they have a big lobby in the Conservative Party. That's the issue. It's not conservatives elsewhere. It's right there. That's the issue. And Jeff and Kevin and Royce, I think we all agree supply management needs to go for the benefit of lower income Canadians, all Canadians.
yeah, no, I think conservatives are open to it, but the dairy farmers have a lot of money to throw around in leadership contests. That's how Andrew Scheer won the leadership of the party. I mean, I think that you're ultimately right, Kevin. We're not going to get to zero tariffs, but we are still at Trump's starting position. It hasn't moved. And so we have to hold the government accountable. They should be getting a better deal for us, and specifically for us in Western Canada. Our concerns need to be taken into account. beyond that of Ontario's manufacturing sector as well, and it's not happening.
I want to end the show today talking about the bail reforms, and you've got to give credit where credit's due. Carney did say he would address it. He would bring a bill forward. He has brought a bill forward, but I have a column in the Winnipeg Sun talking about the fact that the devil is actually in the details. We're hearing now, and Lawrence, you being attorney, you can help us with this. We're hearing now that where Carney talks about there can be consecutive sentences. Well, you already can have consecutive sentences in Canada if the judge decides to put that in place. But we're also hearing, I've heard from some other legal people that, well, this doesn't talk about the deal or the lighter sentences that new Canadians are getting that would impact their immigration status. It's not talking about Indigenous Canadians. And they're talking about how even the idea of saying that a person that's been charged has to prove why he should get bail might be against human rights. It might be against the the Canadian Charter. So what are we hearing now? Are we just hearing more political spin, or do we really believe that the bail reforms that are coming forward are going to impact the violent criminals, or are they going to impact the everyday Canadians that follow the law anyways?
Or maybe have no impact at all, or little impact at all. So first of all, to the immigration issue, the Supreme Court of Canada rendered a decision that said that, this is some years ago, I think 23, I'm not sure, saying that the immigration status of someone, of an accused, is a factor to be considered to lessen sentences. And that's a problem. I don't know why that activism happened. It's obvious, at least to me, at least in my respectful opinion, that's a mistake. It seems to me if someone's here who's not a citizen, the greater onus that they respect our laws, not lesser punishment. So it's exactly the opposite in my view. I mean, no disrespect to them, but that's my view. And we should have legislation that makes that clear. We should have legislation that's clear on the onus issue in bail. We don't. And even this bill doesn't do that. It's not clear. The Harper era 3 strikes and you're somewhat out, not fully out, but somewhat out rule that was overturned as unconstitutional is probably was the right way to go, or something like it. And we know the federal government is now saying that the notwithstanding clause shouldn't be used, even though that was the whole basis of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So complicated issues. We'll have to see how this unfolds a little more. But
let's go back to the bail reform question. Carney's talked about it. He's put out there what he wants to do. Can he legally do some of the stuff he's talking about, Lawrence? You were a human rights adjudicator. Can he do that?
I was once for many years.
Yeah.
But so can he do it? It's possible, but there is an argument to say that there may be a breach. And some judges would say, yeah, it's a breach of charter rights. Some judges would not. Of course, the federal government could employ, if they choose to, the notwithstanding clause to say we don't really, even though it may be a breach, we still want to do it anyway. There are arguments both ways. There's no clear-cut answer. I'm sorry to become a lawyer and how I'm answering that for you, but it is what it is.
So in other words, what I'm hearing is it's a nothing burger. Jeff?
Well, no, it's just like what you're hearing with the question for every legal issue. The answer is it depends.
Yeah.
So yeah. It remains to be seen. First of all, what kind of legislation is going to be introduced, and then it's probably going to take at least a couple of years to see how it unfolds in actual day-to-day practice, and if there are going to be charter challenges. These things don't happen nearly as quickly as we might like them to.
But how do you change? I think it's called the GLAD. Is it the GLAD?
The GLADU report.
Yeah. How do you change that?
Guys, that's a whole other show. GLADU is an entirely. I don't think it has achieved the desired result.
Right. But how does this bail?
Would be the short criticism of it.
And my question is: does the bail reform that's coming forward does it alter that in any way, or does it?
No, probably not.
No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't alter that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lawrence, do you agree that GLADU has not been all that successful?
So for me, if you're asking me, I agree with you. It's a whole other show. I agree that the victims of those crimes are mostly Indigenous people. And it's a presumption, and frankly, perhaps a wrong one, when the Supreme Court was how they balance that in favor of the criminal rather than the community is a big problem.
Yeah, I mean the thing, bail reform is only a small part of the criminal justice problems we have in this country right now. And I don't know if what the Liberals are proposing is a nothing burger, but what we know will happen is even if they pass, tougher legislation, it'll be challenged. The government will allow that to happen, and they won't do anything when it gets struck down, if that's the case. And so I think that with Liberals engaging with these issues, if people look closely, they'll kind of come to the conclusion that they're not going to get what they want when it comes to criminal justice from really any Liberal government. The Liberals are part of the problem in this country when it comes to crime.
So let's talk about Manitoba then. Manitoba is going to introduce legislation that says you can hold a person now for longer than 24 hours, and a person intoxicated or on meth or some kind of narcotics. They want to change it from 24 to 72 hours. Lawrence, is that going to make a difference on the streets?
Very difficult to say. The problems with those people with those addiction and or mental health problems who are on our streets is much more complicated. It requires wraparound solutions, housing, the correct one with the correct services, and much stronger policing.
But will the government, will judges actually will they allow that to happen?
Judges will follow the law.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, I think it's, that's such a complex issue dealing with the people with addiction and mental health issues and homelessness on our streets. It's an enormously complex issue.
Yeah.
If we can hold somebody for up to 72 hours until they kind of more or less recover themselves, maybe that helps a little bit, but I don't think it's not going to solve this issue by any means.
They're going to build a facility that holds 70 people. So how long will it take to have that facility ready? They don't want to put them in the remand center, right? They've kind of a long time ago reduced everything that the remand center did. So let me go to a new topic to end the show, and I'll start with Royce here. The notwithstanding clause still going on, and now we see again in Manitoba, the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, not dealing with Manitoba issues, but helping out what appears to be his relationship with Mark Carney, and wanting to put in a law not allowing the notwithstanding clause to be used.
Yeah. So the idea there is that the provincial government could use the notwithstanding clause, but if they did that, they would have to refer the case to a court to rule on its constitutionality anyway. So it wouldn't really accomplish anything. The argument is that it would educate Manitobans about what's actually happening. My argument is that if the government of Manitoba is using the notwithstanding clause, I think it's going to get covered in the media. People are going to pay attention to it. They always do when this happens. He's also introducing it at a point in the legislative session where it's not going to pass. It's going to die on the order paper. So it raises the question, what's the point of this? Is it to raise the premier's profile?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
come on.
Nationally. He's using DEI as one of the reasons, right? Well, you have to call somebody by the right pronoun. We don't want a government being able to change that. He's attacking Quebec.
This kind of stuff drives me nuts. We've got lots of problems here in Manitoba. Let's have the government of Manitoba keep its head down, focus on our problems rather than what's happening in Quebec right now.
So just to throw in a nickel's worth of opinion, this is what we talked about a few weeks ago, where how the government of Manitoba is intervening in the Quebec language, in the Quebec, not language, but in the Quebec secularism case. And the idea of using a charter issue as a political cudgel, which is what he wants to do, is hugely problematic. I agree with Royce. His job is to govern in Manitoba in accordance with what is within the jurisdiction of the province. This is not, and it's a waste of time, energy, and money, and it should really stop. There's so many problems here, economic problems. Needs to focus there if he knew how to focus there.
Jeff, is the Premier of Manitoba working for his job today, or is he working for the job that he wants in the future?
Well, he keeps saying he doesn't want to go onto the national stage, but his behavior would lead us to think otherwise.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, it's a good discussion today. Again, we want to thank Member of Parliament James Bezan for being on the show. I like the back and forth and open discussion, and the fact that we can actually have the open discussion, not have to worry about it. Right? We can all walk away friends, even if we don't agree on certain things. But I do appreciate that with all three of you. So thank you very much, guys. We'll talk again next week. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. I think there's going to be a number of announcements over the next little while as we lead up to the budget and just how much money we'll be printing.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, guys.
Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.